This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the second half of Stephen King's 1983 novel, Pet Sematary. Second half of the book. This is doing Stephen King always makes me feel just like comfortable. Like this is our comfort zone, right?
It's always surprising to me how the second half of his novels always feels similar, but still different enough to where you feel like you read something entirely new.
Similar to what?
So I felt that Pet Sematary had a similar vibe in its ending to like The Shining and It.
Really?
With one major difference.
Yeah, I was gonna say there is a major difference at the end, especially. But yeah, we can get into that. But yeah, man, I've just enjoyed covering this, and I'm glad that we're gonna go see this movie now, and I'm very, very excited for it. So just in case it isn't clear, the second half of the novel here, and then we're gonna go see the new movie this weekend, and then our episode about the movie will come out next Thursday.
And so this is gonna be full spoilers.
Yeah, full spoilers for the rest of the book, probably for the movie too, because it's going to be mostly the same material. Before we get into it, we are doing a giveaway. We're very excited. We did this one other time back for Ready Player One, but we want to start doing stuff like this more often. And we are partnering with Scribner, who is the publisher for Pet Sematary. And they provided us with 3 copies of the novel with the movie tie-in cover for it. And we are going to be giving those away on our social media platforms. 1 each for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on there, and you can find out how to enter on each. Basically, you're going to interact with each post in a certain way, retweet it, whatever, and then it'll give you an entry. And you can enter on all 3 platforms. You can only win 1 book, but you can enter 3 times.
And the books look great. When you sent me a picture of them, they look awesome.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, I like the cover better than my current cover. Like, I like my current cover on my copy, but I like these new ones better because the movie like poster looking cover is just really cool.
Do you have your copy right next to you?
Yeah, it's the one with the cat eyes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's like the new-ish one.
Yeah, it's new-ish. It looks all right.
Yeah.
But it's not as cool as the silhouette of Lewis Creed standing against a slate gray sky on top of the deadfall. Looks really cool.
Yeah.
At least that's my interpretation of the cover.
I think that you're right.
I guess let's instead of doing like general thoughts, let's just progress through it and kind of react to it as it goes. So let me give you a little summary here. So last we left off, Church was back. It was the end of part 1, and it seemed like shit was about to hit the fan. We made some predictions, and I think they had foreshadowed Gage was going to get hit by the truck, but it hadn't happened yet.
Right, yeah, we were left with that massive cliffhanger. Now, going into this next part right here, you were expecting to at least see the scene, right?
Yeah.
Stephen King does something interesting here.
I should say, one of the only memories I have of the original movie is the scene of the toddler standing in the road in a semi-truck bearing down on them.
Right.
That was something that scared the piss out of me when I was a little kid.
Right.
So, yeah, I was assuming we're going to get the scene in full detail, but we kind of do, but we just get it in a weird way. But let me give the summary. 2-year-old Gage is killed by a speeding truck in a horrible accident. Overcome with despair, Lewis considers bringing his son back to life with the help of the burial ground. Judd, guessing what Lewis is planning, attempts to dissuade him by telling him the gruesome story of the last person who was resurrected by the burial ground, Timmy Baterman. Baterman died while coming home from World War II. His father, Bill, buried Timmy in that cemetery. Timmy came back as a malevolent zombie, terrorizing the townfolk, before the men of the town realized that they must kill him again for good. Judd, along with 3 of his friends, later went to the Baterman home to kill Timmy, only for him to haunt the men with indiscretions from their personal lives that Timmy had no way of knowing. Judd and the men quickly fled in horror, while the mentally unstable Bill killed Timmy and burned their home down, killing himself. Judd states that he believes that whatever came back was not Timmy, but a demon who had possessed his corpse. He then concludes that sometimes dead is better, and states that the place has a power, its own evil purpose, and may have even caused Gage's death because Judd introduced Lewis to it. Okay, so let's stop there. Basically, yeah, let's back up to Gage getting hit. You were about to say that Stephen King does it in a kind of a unique way.
Yeah, we shoot to basically the funeral,
right?
And we're reliving everything as flashback, which is different. But I don't know if it's necessarily what I would have done. Like, I understand that like that's not the typical thing to do, which is why he was doing that. He was subverting and trying to do something different. But it also felt like it took away a lot of the impact of losing Gage, and we just dealt with the guilt of it. Maybe, and like I said, maybe that was his plan all along.
I think it was a deliberate choice made for certain reasons, and honestly, outside of King himself, it can be hard to nail him down. But what I suspect is that he felt like the scene was almost too shocking to just give straight up, and too like it's kind of too much.
Well, we do get it, basically.
We
but
do.
It's just that it's the way that he decided to give it to us.
He
later.
kind of reveals it in stages, right? Like we know that the first thing is him telling us it's going to happen eventually, and the second thing is like it's happened now, and we're seeing the awful kind of repercussions of it, and we get like a taste of like a little bit of a memory of it, right? And then we get a more developed memory of it. And it's like he's building up to actually giving us the scene. And I think it's because King identifies that this is such a powerful moment that to just give it to us straight would perhaps be overwhelming, or perhaps not even feel weighty enough. Whereas this gives it so much weight because we're getting it multiple times through different lenses. So it almost grants it more weight in a way. I don't know. It's just like a very interesting way of dealing with a moment that, like, honestly, if you're sitting down to write fiction and you're like, I'm going to write a scene where a toddler gets run over by a truck, like, how do you do that? Because that's going to be so upsetting and so crazy, and that's a tall task. And I think King found a way to do it, I think, that maintains the horror but doesn't make it feel cheap and like just some sort of flashy surprise.
Yeah, he still does, like I said, he does give it to us. Like, we still do get it in like pretty decent detail, but it's the idea of going through the funeral, and I think even like the punching of the father, and like all the Lewis is like replaying it in his mind over and over, and he's thinking of alternate times that he like grabs the edge of his shirt and dives and catches him just in time. And I do see like how thinking about it and then eventually revealing kind of how specifically it happened was building up to it. But I felt like a lot of this second part here was just tiptoeing around the things that happened. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe if he hadn't left us with that cliffhanger at the end of part one where he was like, and then Gage would be dead, however long, a couple weeks later or whatever it was. If he hadn't given us that, then I wouldn't have been expecting the scene. But because of that, I felt like we didn't get the scene until like close to the end of part two, which was close to the end of the book. And I was like, wow, didn't expect to not have it revealed for so long.
Right. So I guess I didn't have a problem with it, and I think here's why. So for me, this story is being told by Lewis Creed in the future, right? We've talked about him; he's sort of remembering things. Mm-hmm. Now it also is semi-omniscient because we do get other POVs outside of his, especially more in the second half of this book. But for the most part, we're very close to Lewis's POV, and to me, this feels like how you remember things, especially traumatic events, because the moment itself of the really traumatic thing can sometimes be such an intense experience that your memory of it just becomes like really hazy. Mm-hmm. And this is like a notorious problem with trying to interview witnesses to crimes, is that they'll all remember different things. Like that people are notoriously unreliable in actually remembering like what a person looked like or what order things occurred in. And I think in doing it this way, it feels more like we're a distant Lewis remembering, because he focuses more on like what came after the funeral, which is like I can absolutely see like some of those memories are going to stand out a lot more. And it's one of those things where I think your mind kind of tries to protect you from pain. So often you'll like only half remember things. And so to me, I guess he was approaching it from like a psychological memory standpoint, which is quite different because like you can't do that in a movie. Obviously, like you just have to give the scene in a movie. But in a book, you can do that. You can say like, I'm going to write this in a way that a human remembers an event, right? So I think that is something that you can do in a book that makes it kind of unique, and I think that's what he's trying to do here, in my opinion. And like I said, like it's that combined with the fact that I think it's also such a weighty moment, and he understands, what would happen if he wrote it that way. I don't know. I mean, like he could have just written it that way. He could have just written the scene as is, but I kind of think this was the more interesting route to go. And I agree that it was unexpected, but right. I guess I liked that it happened in an unexpected way.
Yeah, it was different. It was definitely different, and I think that that's ultimately where I landed on it, was that Stephen King was trying to do something different than another author might do with this scene, and give it in a way that maybe, like you were saying, yeah, like dealt with it in the way that an actual human would. But with all that said, I did want to say that when we get the backstory of Timmy.
Wait, before we get to Timmy, let's talk about the funeral, because I don't want to just glaze over that. There's a couple things with the funeral too.
Cool.
But the funeral, the bizarreness of the funeral, and him focusing on like people bringing food, and the things like these like I think they're called aphorisms that people say, like these like these little sayings like, oh, they're in a better place, things like that. And there's also a moment where someone says like, at least it was quick. Right. And he gets enraged by it. And a lot of these things like really feel true to me, and on both sides, because like I've been on both sides of this. And on one hand, like you don't know what to say to people when this kind of stuff happens. So you tend to go for like the things that are always said, A, or B, you try and find a silver lining of any kind. And something like, at least it was quick, is you trying to find a silver lining, right?
But it's super morbid and it's awful.
Yeah, it's still an awful thing to say, but people do this all the time.
Right.
Like when I was in my car accident, I was in a hospital for like a month, and I was like really, really badly injured, and I was in a wheelchair and all this stuff. People would say like, well, at least you weren't killed. And like, absolutely, at least I wasn't killed. That is absolutely a silver lining. At least I'm still alive. And I agree with that. But sometimes it would be really frustrating because it's like it feels kind of like it's negating the terrible thing that did happen. It's right. Like, yeah, that didn't happen, but this did still happen, and this really sucks.
I feel like what I've realized, and what I try to do if somebody's going through something, is just tell them you're sorry that it's happening, and say, I can't even imagine what you're going through. If you can't imagine it, just say, yeah. I'm really sorry that this is happening, and leave it simple. And it sounds like you don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you're thinking of saying it, it doesn't sound like you're saying very much, but as soon as you try to say anything more, I feel like you're delving into an area where somebody's going to be, you're not going to be helping.
I agree. And just being there for someone and saying like, if you need anything, or if you need anyone to talk to, like I'm here for you, that kind of thing. I think that's always good. It's when people start trying to make themselves feel better. Yeah, is I think what it is, because that's what it becomes kind of transparent. It's like you're telling yourself that so you don't have to feel as bad about what happened.
Right.
And so that can be frustrating. And I just like that King wrote all that. Like, I think he did a lot of really smart analysis of grief in this novel, mm-hmm. and the power it has over us, and also just the bizarre way that humans deal with it, and how it is kind of like this like bad thing we don't talk about. And that's all cut up in our burial, rituals that we go through. I think it's also like a way for people to try and make sense of the world. If something tragic happens, everyone wants to find like the reason it happened. Right. Like if someone dies of a heart attack, but like, that they were a drug addict earlier in their life. Maybe they recovered when they got later in life, but they were earlier. People will point to that and say, well, they did do a lot of drugs, so I think people always like want to point to some explanation because the like randomness of the universe is terrifying. Mm-hmm. And so often I think, that impetus in people can be really frustrating too, because it can be like it can be really frustrating for someone who's saying like, no, this is a tragedy, it has no meaning, yet mm-hmm. people like desperately want to find meaning.
Yeah, and again, I think that's about making themselves feel better, trying to make others feel better. When really, I think the thing that has to happen is you have to like realize what's happened and grieve and move on from it, if possible. So
the other thing you pointed out that I thought was really clever was there's a whole chapter where Lewis basically has a dream where he says like it was all a dream, and it actually didn't go down that way. And you hinted at it. He says, actually, I caught him and I saved him, and it's presented as this like, it's all a twist. This didn't happen. Everything's okay. And I like it because it's like this reverse twist, right? Because like that's the opposite of what we normally get. And instead it's a twist. Everything was okay, but then the rug is pulled out from under that, and it's like, actually, no, it's not. And I don't know, it just felt so true to life too. Like it was more like he's having a dream, and then he wakes back up to the horrible reality, right? So it's an inversion of that, like everything you just saw was a dream, cliche.
I mean, the whole time we knew clearly this isn't actually what's happening. It's him trying to cope with it. But it did seem true to life. It seemed like something that you would do because you like I was saying before, he's fantasizing about catching the tail of his shirt as he's trying to run out there, or catching him just at the last second. And how can a moment like that not run through your mind a million times? And like thinking about it was like he was like barely ahead of him. You know, he like just outpaced him. And it was just this game. And I really like the detail that he eventually gives. And I think this is when he actually gives the details of the actual accident. He says something about Gage's demeanor changing and realizing that his parents were screaming at him and it wasn't a game anymore right before he was hit.
Yeah.
And that's really affecting. I think that's like, how can you not, like, even that 2-year-old kid realize at the last second that he messed up.
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that Gage was under the influence of the Pet Sematary / being creature, Wendigo, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I honestly hadn't even thought about that, but you're probably right, because it's influencing everyone else.
He does say later that it feels like this creature like is doing all of this. Like it pulled Church into the road, it pulled Gage into the road, it made him want
people
to bury.
Fall asleep.
Like it's making people fall asleep. So that's the like big supernatural force that does remind me of other King novels, you know?
Right.
Like we talked about in The Shining, you know, is not only a story about a man losing his mind, but in our opinion, a story about, the book at least, a story about a hotel or a place that's like haunted, driving a man insane, who maybe was already at the edge. And that's the same thing here, where it's like, maybe you could resist it, but if you even like remotely want to do a thing, this place is sort of like pushing you and egging you on and making you want to do it even more.
And that's kind of like it as well. Pennywise in Derry is influencing the townsfolk to act a certain way. Like he's pushing people feel a certain way, and then he kind of
makes it worse.
Yeah, makes it worse and exacerbates it and pushes them down that path.
You're right. Like that opening, the murder, the opening is like a hate crime, and the very early in the novel,
right.
we definitely saw that, where like there was already racism and hate, but like it was being driven even more by this outside force. That is something that does seem to be very consistent in King's work.
Well, I know he writes other novels that aren't necessarily in fitting with this kind of structure that he has here, but with these three that we've read, there's very much two stories going on, and you can read it as a story, like you could read it as a story of a town who doesn't pay attention to the things that, you know, that they're blissfully unaware and they're constantly being influenced. And you can read it as that, or you can read it as this is a great town where Pennywise has just invaded and influenced, or a mixture of both, which I think we agree with. And I think that's the same thing with The Shining and with Pet Sematary here.
Yeah.
And he's written other things that wouldn't fit in with that kind of formula to pick a word.
Right. He's written non-horror novels.
Right. Like Shawshank Redemption, it clearly isn't going to have some sort of supernatural, like Cthulhu, like monster at the end of it.
No, that would make it a very different book and movie. But yeah, I think I see what your point is with that. It'll be something interesting to track, I think, as we continue to cover more King, because we definitely will down the road. You know, but like we said, like we hinted at earlier, this novel definitely ends in a different way than the other two. But let's save that for the very end, because if we're going to talk about the ending of The Shining and It, I think that is going to be a big spoiler for those two projects. So maybe we'll save it and we'll give like a warning and we'll save it for the very end or something.
So the next thing is this Timmy story that we get from Judd,
yes.
which I felt was one of the strongest parts of this second half of the novel.
I agree. Well, I mean, I think there was a lot of strong parts of this, but this was a standout. This was a great moment and great story.
Did this feel to you kind of like getting the stories in Derry in it, getting some of the backstory, like lore stories from the town? Because to me, it felt like we were getting because we got, there's 4 or 5 stories that we get in it that are telling about the lore and like the horrors that have happened, and this was just like kind of in keeping with that. I loved it. I loved it. Getting like younger Judd and all the other townsfolk together to.
Yeah,
I think it was just really well set up.
I guess I didn't think of that, but I can see why you would. For me, I was thinking more of, honestly, another project that we might be doing here coming up: Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And this was just like, it reminded me of the kind of stories that make it into that book. About just a zombie that's walking down the street, and I could almost see like a gruesome art of it. I think there is some that looks kind of like that, and this went a lot farther than those stories ever go. But it just reminded me of like a classic campfire story that you would hear, that you would think was totally not true, but was very scary, right? And yeah, man, the Timmy Baterman story is very good, and it totally sets up the end of this novel. It provides a stark story to tell Lewis not to do the thing he's considering. Yet, as we see Lewis start to do the thing, it also tells us, like, this is going to be really bad when he goes through with this.
Yeah. Well, I have a question, speaking of that. What do you think it is that makes Timmy not as violent and threatening as, like, Gage was when he came back? Do you think Gage was, like, this chosen... Like, what was it? Why was Gage the one where as soon as it took him over, it didn't like come back and act docile at all?
Yeah.
Like the cat did or like Timmy did. Immediately, Gage is on a warpath.
I think Timmy was more like how Church is, until they were getting ready to kill Timmy, and then this like otherworldly being, the Wendigo, it like kind of like takes control over him, and then when he starts speaking about things he shouldn't know, and that, like, I think that's the Wendigo coming through. I don't know if that means it's always in there somewhere and it's just dormant and then it comes forward, or if it's like there's like a zombie kind of off and then he can just like pop into it. I'm not really sure how it works, but yeah, to me it's like it was just kind of a zombie. And I do like that the Stephen King zombies are different. They're not like, Romero zombies. They actually do think, and it's just like more slowly, and they have like, they're similar to how they were, but different, and they have different like appetites, but...
Which much creepier. I think it's creepier.
It's much creepier, yeah.
Although, and like, that's not to say that like I don't find Romero zombies creepy. I'm just saying, like, in this context for a zombie to have it have personality and to have it have the characteristics still.
Well, and we've had a lot less saturation of this kind of zombie in pop culture.
Right.
Right. Like, whereas we've seen the other kind of zombie many times now.
Right.
But yeah, so that's my read of it. So I think with Gage, the Wendigo had been waiting for, I think, a long time to get back in another person. Like, that was his one chance. It was angry that it didn't work out. And then it was waiting just for its opportunity to get back into a person. And so Gage presented that opportunity. And so, because it seemed like Judd and the creature had this history, right? And like it immediately came for Judd. It had unfinished business.
Right. And this is reminding me of something else that's jumping a little bit ahead, but I think we should touch on it now.
Okay.
We're getting this back and forth in Lewis's head where he's kind of talking to himself, and one of his voices will be like, just do it. Why stop complaining? Just do it. And I feel like that's the Wendigo's like penetrated into his mind, and that's like we're getting on the page the Wendigo's influence, literally within his own mind, which I found really interesting. And we even get a bit of it when Rachel's trying to come back, and he's like, stay out of it. And she's just like, it's almost, it's on the page and it goes by so quickly. And if you keep reading past that, you won't stop to really realize that like she's being influenced in such a blatant way. Yeah. But I think it works really well.
It's creepy too, because it's like it's skipping ahead a little bit, but we see all of our human characters, other than Lewis, trying to fight against it. And the Wendigo's supernatural powers forcing them to not be able to.
Right.
And to me, this elevates this Wendigo up to a really high, powerful status, as much as anything from The Shining or even Pennywise himself, perhaps. It's quite a powerful force.
That would be something to think about, is the battle royale of these three creatures. Which one is more powerful in the power?
I have a
tiers?
feeling that if we read all the Dark Tower, like we might get some of this.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I don't know how much. I don't know if there are Wendigos in there, and honestly, don't tell us if there are, because we will probably be covering Dark Tower perhaps when the new adaptation comes out. But I know that that's what kind of connects all of this Macroverse stuff, and I am curious, and maybe it's blasphemy to say this seems like it could be as powerful as Pennywise. So I don't know, because I think the Wendigo is also like, that's just what people call it. I don't think that's what it is. Like, it's something greater than that.
Well, I think all three of these, the Shining monster, all three of the monsters that we've seen are clearly. We should save this for the end, but the last thing I want to say about it is all three of them are clearly more than meets the eye. They're not just the Wendigo isn't just the Wendigo. It's clearly something from somewhere else, or
Pennywise isn't just a clown.
Exactly. So the I don't think we're supposed to think that the Wendigo is just this massive creature walking through the woods. I think it's from somewhere else, and I think it's we don't know its true form.
All right, let me get a little more summary in here. So just a little piece here, and then we can react to it. Despite Judd's warning and his own reservations about the idea, Lewis's grief and guilt spur him to carry out his plan. Lewis exhumes Gage's body from his grave and inters him in the Pet Sematary, or the burial ground beyond the deadfall in the Pet Sematary. So I wanted to give this its own reaction area, because there's so much work by King done in the parts we just talked about, establishing the level of grief that Lewis is feeling, and then walking him through the steps in his own mind that he takes to get to the point to where he's willing to try this thing. Mm-hmm. And it's so well done, because on the surface of it, it's like, why would he ever do that? He would never do it. It's clear that he shouldn't do it.
Right.
But he sells us on the grief, and then he sells us on the idea of like the sliver of hope he has, of like, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe if I do it while my family's not here. And he comes up with this plan, and then he's like, I'll kill Gage if it doesn't work out, and it'll just be something I have to deal with, but I want to try it just to see what happens. And then we also know that there's the influence, and I think that he probably wouldn't have done it without the influence. But it's like enough there to kind of convince us that a person could try this and might try this even in these circumstances.
Knowing where it ends, we see that Lewis is clearly losing it. He's going crazy. He's going insane. Yeah. And I like to look at where the line is blurred between the influence of the Wendigo and him going insane. Because when he's in the graveyard, I think is a big moment of the influence laying off a little bit. I feel like he clearly went to the graveyard because
the
of
original graveyard that Gage's body was originally interred.
Yes.
Okay.
So when he's in that graveyard that night, I think the Wendigo's influence got him there. But I think once he was there, it was his own. Like, he'd already decided that this was his plan, and then I think the Wendigo kind of let it go from there. I think that it wasn't until he was taking Gage to the Pet Sematary that he was even doubting his plan, and then the Wendigo's influence came back in a little bit. I feel like I can safely say that Lewis had lost it by the time when he was digging up Gage. He was gone.
Right, and for us to believe that this man is losing his mind, we have to be shown the uncontrollable grief he's dealing with. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think all of this funeral stuff and all of this, and selling the closeness to his family and the love for his son, and all of this has to pay off for us to buy this moment. And then I also want to give King huge props for the most realistic, I think, grave digging, grave robbing scene, right? That goes on for a while. It's this big operation. He has to climb over the fence. He keeps thinking he's going to get seen. He loses his keys, but then they're in his pocket, or they're in the ignition or whatever. I think that's what it was, the ignition. I don't know. There's so many great details in that, and it makes it seem extremely difficult, and it feels different than what we see in movies, right? Where it seems like it's the easiest thing in the world to just go in and grave rob, and here it's like, no, this is a really hard thing to do.
Because of the extreme amount of detail that we get, and the way that the struggles that he goes through, and how long this actual portion is, it evokes the idea that you're actually there in a way that
Yeah.
I don't think many grave robbing scenes have ever done, because there's so many little details. Like when he goes to the gate and he tries the gate and he's like, I can't believe I would have been so stupid as to think that the gate would be open at 11 o'clock at a graveyard in a city. And he's like, well, maybe I should put it off until tomorrow. And then he's like, no, it's too late. You're already here. It has to go down tonight. So they're just like he's like hitting these walls that he has to overcome, and he's constantly just like pushing through them. And I think, I don't know, again, I don't know if that's the Wendigo's influence.
How exhausting it is to dig up the bed, to give up the grave. And
it's hours and hours of him there trying to figure out how to do it, how to get, because once he realizes the gate is locked, he has to get over a 9-foot spiked fence.
And the horrific moment of him actually opening up his son's coffin, right? And God, King does such a great job of building anticipation, because this whole scene serves for that too, because we know at the end of this scene he's opening up the coffin of his son, and man, it's so well done. And then it delivers the scares, it delivers the disgust and horror,
and the tense nature of everything, with the cops potentially showing up and shining their flashlights, and people like dogs barking and people nearby.
And then such a great detail that he has to put his son like in the passenger seat instead of in the trunk. And
I mean, how amazing was that moment when he was arguing with himself about whether that was the Wendigo again, the inner monologue. He had to see if Gage was facing forward in the passenger seat, because he thought, he was horrified to think that maybe his knees and everything were bending the wrong way in the passenger seat. And the Wendigo's like, who cares? Like, I mean, my interpretation of the Wendigo, the inner monologue he's having is like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And he's like, I have to know. And
what's also interesting is I think there was kind of another voice that would sometimes come into his head, and it was like the voice of reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought that was him fighting the influence.
It could be, yeah, but you could also read it as another outside influence.
Okay, a little turtle action.
I think you could look like there's maybe a little turtle in here. There's a little bit of like some sort of like force of goodness or something that isn't as powerful. I don't know that that's what's happening, but there were times where I felt like that might be what's going on. I don't know. Like if you wanted to attribute certain thoughts to an outside force, it could be that. But it could just be his own self. Yeah. And I think the ambiguity of it is what makes it brilliant, right? Like it's impossible to say.
And something I wanted to say about the Pet Sematary, and I think what another author may have written into the story, I was predicting that this may have played a part, was the initial Pet Sematary, where kids are taking care of their pets and like going and making sure that is kept tidy. I felt like that was going to be a force of good. I felt like that idea of the children still like grieving over their lost pets and the way that they take care of them was going to somehow be like a force for good that was going to fight against some sort of force for evil, but it wasn't written into the story. But I just felt like that was maybe layered in there. It could have potentially been.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we get the actual process of him bringing Gage's body past the deadfall and into the actual burial grounds. And we see, man, like this is like walking into the upside down or crossing into another dimension or something. He's hearing noises, and it seems like he sees everything more clearly now. He doesn't have Judd there to like tell him, oh, it's just, swamp gas or just the loons, from somewhere else you're hearing. Like he hears laughter. He sees this crazy face in the mist, and then he sees like a tree that's been knocked over by a giant, and he sees like at the very end of it, the Wendigo essentially, right? And or what we think is the Wendigo. And God, it's such a cool scene. Like it's really, really cleverly done. It builds to this moment and it delivers.
And genuinely, the Wendigo scene, that little sliver of Wendigo that we get, and the way that King describes it, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
I did not remember that the Wendigo is 60 feet tall. And like this forest, massive, giant creature that's knocking over trees easily, and the way that he describes the atmosphere when it's nearby, and all of the birds stop singing or.
Yeah, and the clearest look at it, correct me if I'm wrong, is him. He has a dream about it when he gets back, right? And he has a dream about it, and in the dream, multiple people are standing underneath it, including Rachel, covered in blood, and he doesn't know why. Mm-hmm. and
Right.
all the people that have died, and the bull and church and all this stuff, and they're all like looking up at this looming giant with it's like it's like reptilian, and it has like these horns on its head, and it has like fog lamp eyes that are described really creepily. Like,
Yeah, a specific detail was the tongue. There were like a
forked
scaly
tongue.
and the
Yeah.
scale like opens and a worm comes out, and I was like, oh god.
Yeah, so it is very Lovecraftian. It's like almost beyond imagining, and the size of it and the power behind it, and then the fact that like in the dream, that one detail of having Rachel be there covered in blood lends credence to the dream as it not just being a dream, like it's actually something more. And that's done a lot. I mean, through Ellie, we see that multiple times, right? Where her dreams are predicting things, or she's reacting to things that are actually happening.
She's got to be. If we're talking just in terms of the Stephen King universe here, she's got to be Shining.
Yeah, you think?
She's predicting things like exactly how Halloran or Danny did in The Shining.
I like that. Okay, let me get some more summary here. Gage returns from the dead as a monstrous, demonic shadow of his former self and kills both Judd and Rachel. After killing Church, Lewis confronts his son and sends him back to the grave with a lethal injection of chemicals from his medical supply stock.
Now, did you expect this to go so quickly? I will say the Judd killing scene and the Rachel killing scenes were pretty wild.
Let's take each of those as they happen. So Judd, he goes for a cleaver, and he's like, I'm going to take care of this thing once and for all. And Judd feels guilty. Like, he knows that he sort of caused this through his actions, and he did, because he's the one who told Lewis about the Pet Sematary. But he decides he's going to face it, and he feels ownership over it, right? With the whole, like, you know, the man's ground is soil is stonier. I can't remember the exact quote.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. And then also you buy it, you own it or whatever.
Yeah.
You pay for it, you own it.
When you pay for it, you own, and all that. Yeah. We're getting those probably wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure. Slightly, yeah.
Regardless, he feels ownership. He feels like this is his thing to take care of. So he goes after it, and then Church is the one who darts out and trips him up, and then we get the stabbing. And I just love when Gage starts speaking to him with like Norma's voice and all this stuff, and the voice of the Wendigo itself. It's so creepy, and it's a little zombie kid talking. Like it's dark and effective.
Something about, I think it was in The Shining as well, something about kids talking about like sex and very specifically like Nora was, in Nora's voice, he was saying that Nora had sex with like all of his friends and all this. I think that there's something in The Shining that's similar, but King knows that like if a kid is saying something like that, it's going to be it's horrifying and also like so wrong.
It's so wrong, yeah. It's like so taboo because like a kid shouldn't be saying that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's very effective. And then the Rachel scene, I just wanted to also highlight. I think it's brilliantly done because we see Rachel. She finally arrives and she thinks that Judd's hurt, so she goes in. And then there's all these horrific things building up to tell her that what's going on here is wrong. And then she finally sees Gage, and he is wrong, and he's rotten, and she can smell him, and she can see that he is like off color, and something's terribly wrong with him, right? Leading all the way up to that, you're like, okay, she's gonna run, she's gonna scream, whatever. But she doesn't. She like literally embraces him and says like, Gage, it's and like that's such a smart move because I think it like that speaks to the power of grief and like ultimately no matter all that stuff he just told you, this is her son she's seeing again. So that's her reaction.
How did you feel about Gage basically becoming Zelda?
Yeah.
And like
and
like
even
face
after that
changing.
she still hugs him.
Right.
Yeah, because that was like the ultimate. That to me was very Pennywise. That was like, this creature knows what you're afraid of. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, also The Shining. Remember how its like face changes a bunch of times when at the very end?
Yeah. So I guess these supernatural forces in King books, you could say one of the things is that they can perceive your fears and use them against you.
Yeah.
Which
and
is
become
powerful.
them, become your fears.
Yeah. Embody them. That's true. Yeah, so I just thought that was really well done. And then we don't see her die, but then like later when Lewis finds her and her eyes are all bulged out and we just know that she horrifically got stabbed to death by her son. Like this is way darker in my opinion than It was or The Shining.
Yeah.
This is a darker novel.
And I think that's the big difference. That's why I think it's, in addition to the subject matter, it's King's scariest book in his perspective, as well as I think a lot of people's, just because it doesn't pull anything. It doesn't. I don't think it really leaves room for happiness.
Yeah,
it's just there's a lot of struggles and then a lot of failures.
Yeah, for sure. So also, let's react to Lewis. He gets his medical bag. I do like that it is like morphine, because it makes sense that a doctor would go to the thing he knows. Like he doesn't get a gun, he doesn't get an axe, he gets syringes full of morphine, and he goes in, and it's very like he's like euthanizing them almost, right? So he goes and he kills Church, which is like, even though Church is a zombie cat who I've seen do terrible things, I still feel so bad for this cat in this moment. Like it's I don't know, it's impossible for me not to, I guess.
Oh, I did want to say about Judd. Ultimately, he goes down because he kind of he's egged on by the Wendigo and Gage, by those things that I was saying, and he like him. Lunges at him, and that's the moment that Church jumps out to trip him. And I thought that with everything he knows and everything he's been through, ultimately he still can't fight the influence of the Wendigo.
Yeah, that's true. So once Lewis gets inside, we see him have like he has a battle with Gage here, and I thought actually I was sort of impressed that Lewis was able to go for Gage and not be, because he wasn't really taken in by Gage's influence. It felt like to me like he kind of just went for it.
I think it's because we saw Rachel. He saw Rachel go down.
Rachel. I agree. And then it's also like he had been steeling himself for this possibility, and when he sees Rachel, it confirms his worst fear that. And so now it's like that whole thing about taking ownership. I think he has fully taken that on now and says like, okay, I've taken ownership. I'm going to do the thing I have to do. Which
is interesting because ultimately some different stuff goes on in a couple scenes from now.
Right. Well, we can do it here.
But he uses this moment to do the right thing, which doesn't really jive with what he does in a couple more scenes, which I don't know. Where do you see this turn coming from? Because he actually does kill Gage?
So I like that it was written in such a way that hints at him taking Rachel's body out, right? Because it mentions like him going to her body and I think wrapping her up. And then it cuts to him like dousing everything in gasoline.
Oh, I just figured it out, actually. I think I know why, specifically.
Okay.
He was okay with killing Gage and then going to get... Why don't you just finish it, and then I'll say it. I'll finish the story.
Okay, so let me just read the rest of the summary. After burning the Crandall house down, Lewis returns to the burial ground with his wife's corpse, thinking that if he buries the body faster than he did Gage's body, there will be a different result. The book ends with Lewis sitting with his back to the door playing solitaire, listening for Rachel's reanimated corpse walk up behind him and drop a cold hand on his shoulder with her voice rasping, "Darling."
So, yeah, this is what I was just talking about. The King cleverly plays with the audience here, and we think that he's doing the right thing and taking Gage down, but ultimately he's just justified it to himself that if he takes out Gage and then quickly gets Rachel into the Pet Sematary and buries her there, then she will come back and she will be more normal and not tainted by something, because Gage had sat for so long that something was able to taint him in that time is his justification.
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess I read it a similar way, and I see what you're saying. For me, it's like when he takes down Gage, he's doing the right thing, like you said. But Rachel dying is another moment of that acute, just like almost mind-breaking grief that he felt with Gage's death. And even as he's dealing with the responsibility of taking care of Gage, he's faced with a new round of acute grief. And it literally is driving him insane on top of everything else. And like, I guess like he's operating on two levels. Like on one level, he's taking care of his business, but on the other level, once again, the temptation is too strong, and just the idea that like he could maybe if the body was fresher, it would work out. That idea alone is enough to give the Wendigo hooks to influence him again. Because I think this is the Wendigo who dies and then immediately starts influencing him again to come back again.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's when Rachel comes back at the end. It's not just Rachel coming back; that's the Wendigo coming back.
For sure. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I just think that the way that King played with the audience expectations,
Yeah.
the reader expectations.
Yeah, because you think you're getting a happy ending, right?
The result of bringing Gage back, is there any world where you thought maybe he would bring Rachel
No.
back?
So I actually did. I thought like, okay, he's doing it, especially when it said something about wrapping the body, because it didn't make sense for him to do that. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
he's going to try and bring her back. But then when we cut over, because we actually get another POV, it's through like, I think his name's like Steve or something.
I think so.
At the end,
his friend Steve from the clinic.
From the clinic, Steve comes and he like encounters Lewis taking the body over the deadfall to go back into the gravesite, and I thought that we were going to get Steve somehow causing it to break. Now it doesn't make sense narratively in retrospect, because like Steve was a nobody. He was not even like a side character, so it makes no sense for him to play a major role in the end here. So what ends up happening does make sense, then, that he doesn't do anything. But he just bears witness, I guess, for us is the one thing he does.
What I was thinking is, we talked about last episode, is this kind of like cyclical nature of it, where
yes,
when you bring a pet there, when you bring someone there, and you know of it, eventually you influence someone else to go back in there. And I thought we were going to see him bring his friend Steve in there, and then Steve would see all of this go on, and then like the audience would think that maybe somewhere down the line Steve would carry on the tradition and bring something that he loved, or someone that he loved there, to bring them back, and the cycle would continue.
But he doesn't. He does say that he never returns. So I think Steve, because he doesn't actually go with him into there, he almost does, but he doesn't. And then he says he felt like he was very close to get brushed by something mysterious and horrible, right?
Well, he saw the yellow eyes.
He saw the yellow eyes, yeah.
And he dreams of it. We get that little section where he talks about how only in his dream does he really remember that day at all, and he sees the Wendigo and wakes up in a cold sweat, and think it's really great detail there at the end.
Oh, also, last time I just remember we were theorizing about what Oz the Great and Terrible thing was about, and it's definitely like that's the Wendigo, which the Wendigo is also kind of equated to death itself, and those two are kind of interchangeable, I think, in this story. Like if death was a force, and that force was malevolent, then that force would also be the Wendigo, I guess.
Yeah.
So that keeps coming back. We also get these Bible quotes. Like we get a Bible quote at the start of part 3, a Bible summary or something, where it's, Lazarus commands them to come forth and all this stuff. And there's also a really brilliant breakdown of like spirals and how that symbol has appeared in ancient Egypt and throughout time and in nature and all this stuff, right? And that's all absolutely true. And
I love the actual, they're talking about like the chaotic nature of a spiral, the beginning and the end, and where does it start, where does it end, and I love that.
And connecting it to where it all is leading somewhere, and to the other side of perhaps the veil or something. So all of that leads to like, it justifies what's happening and it sells it, right? And it sells it in a way. It's like, this is in our Bible, this is in our history, this is in the universe itself. So believe this thing, that this is real. And even though we know it's fiction, when King is like telling us giving us all this proof, it's selling it to where if you have just like an ounce of doubt about like, could something like this actually happen, it just makes it all the more terrifying.
You brought up the Bible stories and Bible allegories, I guess, that he puts throughout. And the one that really stuck out to me was when Judd was trying to stay awake under the influence of the Wendigo. And they compare it to Paul falling asleep when the Romans come to take Jesus.
Yeah.
And how Paul fell asleep and Judd fell asleep. And I thought that was a really interesting comparison that he was making.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all for the same reason, right? Like that's kind of hinting that this force has been around for a long time and maybe was influencing things throughout history, right? Or forces like it, I guess.
Right. And there was a moment where something was even said about Christianity, and I can't remember if it's Lewis in his inner monologue thinking about something, but they're talking about Jesus and they're talking about the Bible and they're talking about Christianity. And then Lewis thinks about how like something far more ancient and far more terrifying has always been there. And he's sensing the presence of this and how like small these other religions feel in comparison to that, or something along those lines. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think that's all serving the same effect, right?
Yeah.
As we're getting to the end here, we also see Lewis insane. Hair's white. He looks aged, and he's mad, right? And he's carrying his wife's corpse. I thought that was a really just cool detail. Showed that like he's gone through hell and it's affected him and it's changed him. I'm wondering, do you think we'll see a white-haired Lewis Creed in the adaptation?
I don't think we get the epilogue here. I don't think we get it in the movie.
Whoa,
I think
you don't
it's
think
left.
you don't think he brings back his wife in the movie?
No, I do think we get that. I just don't think we get the scene where he's like talking to the cops with the hat on and the gloves on and all that before his wife comes back.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, his wife's definitely coming back. I definitely think that's happening.
well, let's save some more predictions maybe for like the very end of the episode. But just to get back to the book itself, the monster in this book to me is a monster. Like if I guess it's kind of a spoiler for it. So I want to give like a light spoiler warning for it. But if you could say that Pennywise is sort of like fear, like a god of fear or like a fear incarnate. And I don't even know if that's true, but I feel like he kind of is. To me, this monster is more like grief incarnate.
Or death.
Or
Grief and
just death, yeah. But I think specifically like the grief we feel towards death. And maybe that's a facet of death. I like to think that King was contemplating the grief he would feel over the loss of his son, which we talked about in the first episode. He had a close call with Owen. And in contemplating what that grief would feel like, he attributed it to like, what if there was a creature that it could inhabit, like could embody that grief and that was its power, right? Like he's giving symbolic substance to an idea. And I feel like Pennywise is kind of that for fear, and here the Wendigo is kind of that for grief over the loss of someone near and dear to you.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I think it's really cool, right? It's I always I like when I encounter something that's like such a big, wild idea, I want to try and figure out like how did that start, and I'm wondering if maybe it was something like that.
Also, light spoiler for Shining, since we're doing the It Shining Pet Sematary. I wanted to know what you thought. What would the Shining boil down to, and what would the monster represent if it was the god of something?
That's a great question. For The Shining, if I had to try and pick something, I think it's more like, it's a little different, but it's more like man's capacity for evil against its fellow man. Because to me, it's like, it goes back to, the eradication of the Native Americans in that area. We see a lot of crime going on in the hotel, and there's definitely a chicken and egg thing of like what's causing it and what's causing what. But to me, it's all about just kind of like senseless violence that people are capable of, and since the senselessness of it also lends itself to insanity. So I think that's why we see Jack Torrance lose his mind. So to me, like, I guess it's less targeted and more just kind of like a free, just like the senseless violence that humans are capable of, given form in the form of the hotel. How does that sound? I don't know. I'm just pulling something out of my ass.
No, I mean, I think you're right. It's hard to boil it down to one word for The Shining, because this is also kind of a character going insane over time.
Yeah,
by the influence,
but for
of
a
something.
specific reason.
Right.
Like,
and I think it's
free.
like, and with Jack Torrance, it's specifically like the family that he loves, eventually he grows to hate, or
he just starts hating them. Yeah.
He hates them, and he under the influence, but also maybe some feelings of he's not able to accomplish or be as successful or be the person he wants to be because of his family. But and then there's also that stuff that's baked in with the actual hotel, and the reason why the hotel is the way that it is because of this cycle of violence.
So the ending here, now that we're doing some spoilers, and a spoiler for the ending of a full-on spoiler for the ending of It and The Shining, those stories both have happy endings, ultimately. Bad shit goes down, people die, but the Thing is defeated. In stark contrast, this novel, the Thing is not defeated. The Wendigo is back at the end. Lewis has given in to its power, and we're not left with the feeling of like you could face all this terrible stuff, but at the end you come out the other side and you're okay. That the other two books give you. This book doesn't give you that. This book gives you like that all the other way that a lot of horror goes, and that's you're just left with the horror of it, and you have to sit with it, and there is no silver lining at the ending.
That gives, I think, some credence to the idea that maybe the Wendigo is death, because in thinking of it, fear can be overcome. And maybe with The Shining, like a cycle of violence could be overcome, but you can't overcome death, and it's eternal. It's going to happen, and maybe that has something to do with it, like the hopeless nature of it, and the way that you can't beat it.
Yeah, and you could also say maybe grief itself being an even more powerful emotion, right? Like it's because grief over losing someone. A lot of people tell you, like, it never really goes away. It changes, or it can soften over time in certain ways, but often it's like it never goes away. And whereas like fear can sometimes be conquered completely and driven out. And I guess in that sense, like maybe you're right. Maybe that is why he chose not to have sort of the happy ending here. And honestly, I think this is also just the more appropriate narrative ending for this story too, just because all the things we talked about, like and Lewis makes so many mistakes that it doesn't feel right for him to get away scot-free at the end or something, or even not get away scot-free, but like to survive this thing and be okay. Like he needs to have really bad repercussions, and that's what we're seeing.
And I guess with that being said, Jack Torrance still succumbs to what he is dealing with, and he makes a lot of mistakes along the way too. So both of them kind of get their comeuppance. Yeah.
But Rachel dies in this book. Wendy does not in The Shining. You know what I mean? So I think that they're in more ways, like, because Rachel didn't deserve any of this. Gage didn't deserve it. This is all darker in my opinion. So Lewis needs to have an even worse fate, I guess, and Lewis's family gets caught up in it. Yeah. Ellie, I guess we can assume survives and is okay, or and perhaps haunted by it.
Her grandparents,
but she's with her grandparents, so she's not there for it. Which so that's if you want to look for the one character that maybe escapes and is okay. I wonder if I would love to hear people who have read like all of King's work. Does Ellie Creed ever show up again or get mentioned again in any of his other novels? I'd be really interested.
I think there was like sequels to Pet Sematary, and maybe her story was told in like Pet Sematary 2, or there was like,
I don't think there's another novel. So if that would be a movie.
Movie specific, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if that's actually true. I think that I heard something about like Pet Sematary 3. Maybe I don't think that ever came out, but that would have been the plot of it or something.
Okay, we have to look into that for sure. Okay, so I think let's save for the very end some predictions for what we're going to get out of this adaptation. Now, you've seen the other 80s adaptation, and I haven't. So it'll be interesting to see like how you think they might stay to the same, or they might try something different. But yeah, I'm just going to throw out random shit. I'll probably be wrong. But let's save that for the very end.
Same here, yeah. I'll probably be wrong.
Okay, well, that was fun, man. So we just wanted to thank a brand new patron, Sean L. Thank you so much for signing up to support us. He's going to get access to all of the bonus content we have out now. We have a new bonus content episode that just came out. It's us giving our Game of Thrones houses and reacting to the short story Lucero, which was written by Andy Weir, canonical fan fiction for Ready Player One. Complicated, but if you're a Ready Player One fan at all, you might want to check that out. In order to get access to that, visit patreon.com/ink2film, and you can find all the stuff that we're offering our patrons.
Also connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at ink2film, and join our Council of Inklings, which is our Facebook group where we post polls and other adaptation-related news. And also make sure if you're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, make sure you like and retweet and do everything you can to try to win those Pet Sematary novels that we're giving out.
Yeah, that's right, man. We got 3 novels. They're looking great. I want to give them out, so make sure you enter. You can enter up to 3 times on those platforms. It's all explained in the post itself. You'll see all the rules and what you got to do, but definitely enter. If you like this episode, please give us a rating and review on wherever you download podcasts. And, that helps us immensely get recognition and get the word out.
If you wanted to leave feedback, you can write in to inktofilm@gmail.com. And we wanted to say thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts. And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man. So let's get some Pet Sematary movie predictions. I'm realizing that I'm probably going to have to go see this movie alone. Which is going to be added creep, right? Like, you don't have anyone there to help you, like, other than some strangers, because my wife is not going to see this movie. I can tell you that much right now. She does not do this kind of scary stuff, and I don't really know anyone else in town who would be interested in this sort of thing, I don't think. If anybody I know is listening to this and you do want to go see Pet Sematary, let me know. Because I don't really want to go see it alone, but I will if I have to.
What I want you to do is if you end up going alone, I want you to go to like a 2 a.m. showing or like a 1 a.m. showing.
real
really late at night by yourself in the theater by yourself.
But yeah, so let's come up with some predictions, man. Yeah, what's your predictions? How do you think this, because this adaptation is getting good reviews, right? And so it feels to me like they must have done something better than the original, smarter maybe. I don't know if it's through adding stuff to their adaptations, or maybe addressing things that the other movie failed to like address in the adaptation process. But I haven't seen the other one, so I don't know.
So my theory of kind of what we can expect from this movie is, I think with the success of it, I think we're going to see a very similar toned film. Maybe not quite as like Goonies-esque with the children. This will be more adult, maybe.
I don't know. We'll get that.
I just mean in terms of an adaptation, like in terms of the overall vibe of the scariness. I think that it's going to be a scary movie, but I don't think that it's going to be like something that I don't know. Then again, I have no idea. But my predictions for it are
different director.
It's going to be,
so
yeah.
Who knows?
I just think that like they've seen like a King adaptation. Like I think you have to go lean into the things that make the movie, that made the book popular. Because if you shy away from some of those things because you feel like audiences aren't interested, you're probably not going to hit the same people the same way. So I think we're definitely seeing the Wendigo. Yeah,
I was going to say, are we going to see the Wendigo?
Yeah.
You think we are?
We see the Wendigo for sure, in my opinion.
See, I kind of don't think we are going to see it.
We have to. I think we have to. I think in order to get that sort of dread and that scariness that people are talking about, and people are like, it's so good. Like, it can't just be this force that's bringing things back.
Yeah.
It's got to be like...
Because I was thinking it might be kind of more like a possession, like one of those... I haven't seen all these movies, but there's all these like possession movies that are really popular, and like haunting movies, and I need to see more of them because some of them apparently are really good. But I feel like we're going to get a creepy kid. We're going to get creepy kind of like ghost-like hauntings through the sister. Yeah, I don't know. Are we going to get this supernatural being? Are we going to see a 60-foot Wendigo walking through a forest?
I don't necessarily... It's not going to be like broad daylight, see a 60-foot Wendigo. But I think there's going to be something lurking in the woods for sure.
Yeah, cool. I hope so. The one thing that I know for a fact is there's a bunch of kids wearing animal masks, because that was in the trailer. And what function are they going to serve? Because... we have Judd already is going to tell them about the Pet Sematary. So who are these kids, and what is their narrative function?
I think they're just the kid. I think those are the kids that are taking care of the original Pet Sematary, not the one that brings people back. The one that like, I think they're just the kid.
You don't think they have any greater function than that? They're not going to like...
I don't think so.
Harass Louis Creed's family in some way, or who knows what?
It could be, but I don't think so personally. I think that's like a interesting looking shot for the trailer that gets people in, and I think it'll be cool to see them in the actual Pet Sematary, and I think maybe it'll make it feel more ritualistic, and it'll get that across to audiences that there's like some ritual, like weird stuff going on. So
I feel like we're kind of saying like we think it's going to be a pretty faithful adaptation, but if the track record of how these adaptations go, it's probably going to be a lot different. We're probably dead wrong. It's probably going to be reimagined in multiple ways, because that's what often happens in adaptations. Not always, but often happens. So yeah, it's so hard to predict because you're getting a director and screenwriter's vision of another bit of material. And it's also like, hey, by the way, like people who keep saying that this is a remake of the 1989 movie, that always annoys me because it's not. Whenever you're adapting from a source material, to me, you're just getting a new adaptation of the source material, not a remake of the movie. You know what I mean? Like, that's a distinction that I like to point out, because I don't think they're watching the old movie and going, what do we want to take from the old movie? What do we want to get rid of? I think they're going back to the novel and ignoring the old movie as if it didn't exist, in my opinion.
And that's something that I constantly feel like needs to be talked about too, because there's so much of that goes on where if you're basically saying this movie came out and some people love it, but let's tell the story that was trying to be told down to a T. And I think we got that with like It. If you think about the miniseries and then we got the movie, I think the movie's a lot more faithful.
We'll see how of It Chapter 2, if it delivers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I think that you can see that a lot. I mean,
it was faithful in some ways, but in other ways they did change a lot. We didn't get. I mean, we're getting into It now, but we didn't get a lot of those like classic horror monsters that were in the novel. So, and still, it was reimagined in some ways. And I think we'll continue to see more of that. But yeah, man, I'm just excited. I'm very amped up to see this movie now. And I'm so glad I read this. To me, this feels like a classic King novel. I think it's like a must read if you want to, consider yourself a King fan, which I do. And I feel like I can finally say that for real now because I've read this novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the ones to catch. I feel like we're going to end up covering a lot of those on the podcast. So if you want more Stephen King, come back next time.
Yeah, if you want us to keep covering King, send us suggestions for like what King project you really want us to hear us talk about, because I know that we might do some of the new ones that are getting adapted, like the Dark Tower, but also we want to revisit older ones like the Carrie and Cujo, and there's just a million other adaptations that we could touch on. So let us know which ones you're most interested in, and we'll keep a tally of like what we hear, and that'll affect what we do in the future for sure. I
gotta say, selfishly, I really want to do the Dark Tower, because and just even if it's just to do the book, because I'm really excited for the new miniseries that's coming out, but even if it's just to do the book, because I am dying to know how he threads all this stuff together in a satisfying way.
Yeah.
Because what I know of the Dark Tower is like the gunslinger stuff. So how does that tie in with this multiverse stuff and like the
man in black being pursued by the gunslinger? Who is the man in black? I don't know.
Right. I don't know any of that
I also
stuff,
have read The Stand, and you haven't, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's another big one that probably connects very directly to all of this and to the Dark Tower. Yeah.
Crazy. I think I'm really excited to cover that one, because if only just to know, like, can he pull off this like, is it you know what I mean? Does it live up to all of these other books?
Yeah. I don't know. People absolutely love the Dark Tower series, so but I feel like I kind of needed to read a lot of these other novels to like make me want to read that now, because now I want to know how it all connects, and I want to be able to catch little references and stuff. But anyway, I think we've gone on long enough about our other King stuff we want to do in the future. Definitely make sure to come back next week when we talk about this new movie, and make sure to follow us on all of our social medias to see how to win that book, because we're going to be announcing the winners on April 12th. So stay tuned for that. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.